So thank you everyone for joining us today and be part of these incredible conversations that I am going to have with four incredible experts in this field. I'm also really excited to see all women panel today. And I'm delighted to open such an important conversation with everyone that is joining us today. So we might have some pinging still happening at the background, but hopefully that is not going to be disturbing in this webinar. Given that we have three great panelists, I suggest that we start with the webinar and we will be admitting everybody joining the webinar as we go along. So welcome to Operationalizing AI Ethics Principles into Everyday Activities. First, I would like to start with a very brief agenda. We will have very brief opening remarks, and then we will give our speakers the opportunity to present their own responsible AI journeys. We have speakers from Telstra, Orange, and Telefonica who will share their expertise and learnings on this ethical AI itself. We will then dive into the panel discussion, and we will finally conclude with questions and answers and with closing remarks. It is really important to mention that you do have an option to comment and add any questions that you might have. You can also vote for these questions, and we will try our best to respond them as we go and as we proceed with the webinar, and especially at the very end when we have questions and answers. The other thing that I would like to mention is that we are recording this webinar because we do hope that globally multiple different organizations are going to look into it, and potentially this is not necessarily the best time for them to join in person, and hopefully they will look at the recording session. So let's start with the opening remarks. I think for everybody that is on this call already knows what an incredible opportunity AI presents. And if looking at some of the researchers that are already out there, the PwC estimates that AI could contribute $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030. I also really like to put to the forefront the UNESCO stats that it's putting on their website, where they're sharing that 11 million students could have an access and could benefit from AI to complete secondary education. I'm really excited about the PwC study, PwC Australia study that we are working with together now, on which we are updating the AI framework on multiple different opportunities that exist in this space across multiple different teams and sub-teams, all of them which would support addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. Just to mention the main teams, these are cities and public infrastructure, climate change and environment, managing disasters, as also industry and commerce and social inclusion. However, as we all know, and I think that's why we are all on this call and listening to this webinar, where there is an opportunity, there are also risks and there are challenges. And as AI is increasingly essential element of the infrastructure on which our society is built, we need to be able to trust AI to behave in the way we want it to. And when it doesn't, we need to understand why this is the case, and very importantly, what went wrong and who is accountable for this. As all of you most probably know, is that a huge amount of effort has gone into understanding the AI principles, into publishing AI principles, and starting to think about how ethical AI looks like. But what we are also seeing is that organizations rolling out ethical AI principles are still struggling in incorporating them into their business as usual. And this is what is going to be our conversation today. Within the GSMA, we worked with a group of mobile operators where we started thinking in what way can we create a practical playbook that will support organizations in implementing AI principles. And what we've done is that we looked across multiple different areas that are required when embarking on this responsible AI journey. We made a step back for all of those that are only starting the journey, and we actually started looking at the principles themselves. So we are giving an overview of common ethical principles that we believe are important for the organizations to consider. We have then also looked into the governance models and actually spotlighted one particular governance model, which we will also briefly mention today. Of course, we looked at the technical tools which are required when you start thinking about operationalizing AI principles into practice itself. And finally, we actually concluded with the recommendations itself. I would like to invite all of you to have a look at the AI Ethics Playbook, and you will be able to find it in the link provided below. Very importantly, at this point, I would really like to stress that it is written in a regulation agnostic way. So while we are acknowledging that there are multiple different regulations or conversations around regulations being out there, it is not written in a perspective of one specific national regulation. And hence, whenever you're putting this in practice, you will need to adapt it depending on the regulation that exists in your country itself. And final remark is that it is really important that, as we mentioned, this is a rapidly evolving space. And from this perspective, so many things are changing, not just the regulations themselves who are being incorporated, and not just the way we look into the AI and how we are implementing the AI principles into everyday activities. And from that perspective, we really hope that this is a living document, and we would love to hear from you. We would welcome inquiries from organizations that would want to help us advance this further. So with this in mind, I will actually introduce my panelists, and I'm really delighted to have these conversations with all three of you, Lisa, Joaquina, and Roxanne. Not only you're representing geographical span, I think global one. From Australia, Lisa, you're presenting Telstra, Joaquina from Telefónica, Spain, but also operations across South America, and Roxanne from Orange, specifically based in France, presenting, as mentioned, Orange, and multiple regions that you're overseeing. So Lisa is Telstra's group owner for data intelligence, delivering and operating advanced analytics and AI-enabling technology, supporting channels and segments. And in recent years, Lisa has played a critical role in the definition and execution of Telstra data and AI strategy. Roxanne is Sustainable Digital Society Research Domain VP at Orange, and her responsibility is to lead research programs in the field of smart cities, responsible and ethical AI, health, mobility, agriculture, Industry 4.0. She's also the PMO of Orange's Data and AI Ethics Council. And last but for sure not least, Joaquina is Senior Manager in the Chief Data Office area in Telefónica and is leading the implementation of responsible AI and the fourth platform framework. Her latest work has been focused on data and AI projects, defining, implementing the AI ethics by design approach, and implemented the data culture transformation program across the whole group. So let's get started. Lisa, I will go to you first, and it will be incredible to hear the perspective from Telstra and how it worked very closely hand in hand with the Australian government in establishing AI ethics principles and the journey itself. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. First, I would like to just acknowledge the work that we've been doing with GSMA and the other operators to develop the playbook. It's been a really valuable piece of work for us, and I found it really personally very rewarding. So thank you for that opportunity. Before I get into our journey specifically around responsible AI, I thought I'd just set the scene. Our T25 strategy had a heavy reliance on data, and over the last few years, there's been significant effort to mature our assets, our processes and policies. This has allowed us to implement a mature framework on what was already a very strong foundation of risk, security and privacy, as an example. So the implementation of our data governance framework supported accountability and improved decision-making with some really clear guardrails. So responsible AI for Telstra actually started with a really solid data governance foundation. More recently, we announced our T25 strategy, and data will continue to play a critical role in our network and digital leadership. And as part of that, we also announced some very specific goals around our utilisation of AI, how it will enable and enhance our processes and also transform our workforce. But perhaps now we get into some of the practical steps that we've taken around responsible AI. So in 2019, we established Telstra's Data and AI Council as the peak body for Telstra to make decisions around data and AI. This council consists of executives representing all parts of our business, and then key corporate accountability leads such as risk, security, and legal, to name just a few. This virtual leadership team is tasked with making decisions on how we manage, govern and use data and AI in the organisation, along with resolving issues that cut across the entire organisation or multiple functional units. In that year, we also joined forces with the Australian government and we're one of 10 larger corporations that across multiple industries that developed Australia's AI Ethics Principles, which were published in November 2019. Essentially, this sets, as you can see on the right, 8 specific principles. And to touch on a few, so for example, human, social and environmental wellbeing is really about how we analyse the potential impacts of our implementation of AI and look beyond sort of the very near-term or immediate impacts to think broadly and longer term around to understand the social environment benefits of what we're doing. Another example around accountability is all about understanding the different accountability across all levels across the organisation, including things like the actions of an AI system, implementing that system and ensuring that that's done correctly, and setting a balance of the system's objectives. These ethics apply to both AI that we develop in-house and also AI purchased from third parties. So when Telstra purchases third-party systems, we remain responsible for its performance and we take steps to ensure these purchased AI technologies are working in line with our ethical principles. So as organisers start to leverage the playbook, which I'm really proud of our work, they'll see that these principles are very much considered. And during the development, it was clear that the other operators have had a really similar focus. Following the release of the principles, we participated in an ethics pilot, again with the government and other industries, to understand the practical barriers for organisations. So regardless of the type of industry, the size of the organisation, and understand what things need to occur to overcome these barriers. The findings out of that pilot, to give you a few examples. So one, implementing principles allows businesses to prepare prior to public demand, manage in line with community expectations, and respond to government or regulatory policies. It called out that there are a number of complex issues when it comes to implementing AI and doing so ethically, and that there's value in corporations seeking assistance from academia, from experts, from government, or like us, working in with industry bodies like GSMA and the collaboration that we've done across the mobile operators. Another key part of that was, that the culture and our staff capability is actually really important. And that may be simple awareness at all levels of at the company, but also really deep technical expertise for those that are delivering AI capability. And lastly, that ethical AI policies, standards and processes really support a business in responsibly implementing AI. In 2020, we further elevated data and AI in the organisation with the formation of our Chief Data and AI Officer. This function, led by our Chief Data and AI Officer, Noel Jarrett, is accountable for our data and AI governance frameworks, our data management and data quality, data architecture, and our data and AI strategy. In 2020, we implemented our responsible AI policy. This is a company-wide commitment to develop and use AI systems in our operations and throughout our business relationships in a manner consistent with those principles. Next slide. So I thought I'd talk to you about some of the practical things that we have implemented. And one of those is Risk Council for AI and Data, or Arcade as we call it. So, because policy is great, but you need a way to actually implement that into our day-to-day. So our AI governance model sets really clear accountabilities and responsibilities, and it documents some key roles and decision rights across the organisation. That includes key roles such as like executive AI owners who are custodians of those AI systems. But then we have additional bodies like Arcade, where we have people from various roles across Telstra that come together. Arcade's role is to consider the broader human, societal, environmental impacts of our use cases and the decisions they make, along with reviews to check that they're in accordance with the law in the jurisdictions that we operate. So Arcade is responsible for performing risk assessments of the use cases brought before it, and it covers all stages of development. For use cases that carry a higher risk, that review is then also done by our Data and AI Council. So to give you a sense of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, I work with teams and lead teams delivering AI capability, and I also own a number of platforms that are leveraged by others. These teams will go through a process of assessing a use case using a questionnaire, and that is then presented to our Arcade with the support of our Data and AI governance team, which is led by Stuart Powell. So I think what's been great out of the work that we've been doing, these sorts of frameworks across the operators have been pretty consistent, and they ensure that we're implementing AI in a responsible way, but we're embedding it into the way that we operate every day. So I think whilst there might be some slight variations, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the work the other operators have been doing on their journey. So Moisa, perhaps I'll hand back to you, and we'll hear from others.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. It was incredible to hear components that taken you on your journey through years. And also thank you so much for sharing more about Arcade. And yes, certainly we are going to hear a little bit more from yourself later on in the panel discussion. I would like to encourage everybody again to post messages if there are any, and please add if the message is or the question is for a specific speaker or for the group itself. But now to Roxanne. Roxanne, it will be incredible to hear from you around Orange's journey on this ethical AI. You've been working on this topic also now for several years. Please do, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. For Orange, next slide, please. For Orange, we worked, I will say later on, we worked since 2014 on this topic and begin to thinking about how the AI would influence our work and our daily business. In line with our purpose, which is as a trusted partner, Orange gives everyone the key to a responsible digital world. And with our strategy Engagement 2025, one of our main ambition is to place data and AI at the heart of our innovation model with 5 key priorities, which are smarter network, reinvented customer experience, greater efficiency, operational efficiency, and the last but not the least, the responsible and sustainable data and AI. Next slide, please. And we began, as I said, to work on the question and issues which arise around this topic since 2014, and identified these main questions for us. There is a lot of questions, but principally For us, it was to tackle the long-term impact of AI on society, the surveillance, security versus freedom, the environmental impact of AI, the data quality and appropriate data, automation and impact on work, collaboration with AI, transparency and explanation of AI processing, to whom, how, to be transparent, AI reliability and security and discrimination, and how can increase social, if there is increasing social injustice and inequality. Next slide. In 2017, we were part of the high-level expert group on AI in European Commission and contribute to the ethics guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence. The first step was to define our principles and values in line with our purpose. Then we identified the requirement for trustworthy AI for us, and now we are developing adapted technical and not technical methods to implement these requirements. Our principles are mainly like Telstra's, which is the solution must respect human needs and operate under human supervision. They must respect diversity and fight against the risk of bias or discriminations. The data that feed the AI algorithm must respect privacy and be subject to careful governance. The robustness and security of AI-based solution must correspond to the specific challenge of each application, and the AI-based solution must be explained in a transparent and intelligible way, and the chain of responsibility must be clear, which is the accountability. We strive to implement ethical and reliable AI throughout the life cycle of AI-based system. We have developed checklists and guidelines tailored to each phase of AI development, deployment and operation, and at each phase, even in the during the operation, because as you know, the deep learning are moving differently each purpose of AI-based system. So we put some questionnaire in the operational AI-based system to every we don't know now, every year or every 2 years to verify that that everything is okay, and these principles are always in line with our value. The results of the operation are in line with our value. Next slide, please. We have to define, as I said, our ethical value and operationalize that. We have also to define our limits and our choices, how far we are willing to go. AI can be so responsible that it is less efficient, so we have to balance that. We have to value the responsibility of our take advantage of the constraints imposed, define the feedback process. We built a collective and ethical operation throughout the group by adapting the specificities of each country, culture and regulation. As you maybe know, we are in 28 countries in the world, mainly in Africa and Middle East and Europe, and each country has his regulation, his culture, and we can just have the same way of tackle these issues in every country in the same manner. Because if I can give an example, the privacy, the notion of privacy in Africa is not very the same that in Europe and the notion of community is different, etc. So we have every time to adapt this principle, the operationalization of this principle to the local culture and regulation. So we put we have this top-down and bottom-up approach, which every time give us some feedback and from the experiences and questions, and we put in place some training, some tools, some commitment in order to deploy this principle in every country. Next slide, please. And the main thing is that we put in last year in place Data and AI Ethical Council, which is composed of 11 external experts and with some internal also experts in order to look at every use case which arise some question or problem in order to better put it in place. And we are doing with Emily, which maybe some of you knows, which works with me, some local council also with the legal ethics risks, which every month look at every use case and look at this principle, and maybe if they don't find an answer, ethical answer to the question, they would give it to the council in order to analyze that and make some recommendation. This use case and this work is also under supervision of the ExCom of Orange ExCom, which validate or not the advice of the council, and then we have a continuous improvement process in order to know better how to tackle these questions. Next slide, please. In parallel, we work with the countries. We have some reference in each country in order to put in place a dedicated checklist and guideline and tools to each of their purpose and use case. And in parallel, we work on some training, 3 types of trainings. The first training is for everybody in Orange. It's a sensibilization on AI risk. It's per principle, and the main question that we have every time we discuss that with everybody in the countries is what is the difference between AI ethics versus compliance versus regulation, etc. So in this training, we explain that very clearly. We also have a training with some use cases, the real cases, which is also for employees who are impact with AI, also with managers, because they have also to answer the question around what will be the change in the organization and work in Orange with the AI coming on our life more and more, and for the AI practitioner, we have most specific and expertise training, which for them with the visa and diploma, because we are working to somewhere like the compliance that we have. It's everybody has to pass this the visa and the diploma and the compliance. In a few years, we will ask every employees to pass also this training, because I don't know if you know, the European Commission is working on the AI Intelligence Act, Artificial Act, which is a new regulation that all in this regulation, the telecom infrastructure will be as a high risk use cases. So we have to prepare every employee to this regulation, which will arrive, I think, in 2 years. So that's all we are doing. It's a long way to go for us, but we are working with everybody and work with GSMA and all of you. Make us see how the other operators look at this type of problematic and how they implement this AI. So it's very useful for us. Thank you for these workshops and this conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Roxanne. It was, thank you so much for sharing the journey that Orange has taken and multiple steps that were taken on this journey. We will look a little bit further into some of these aspects in a bit, but for now, let's, Joaquina, over to you. Maybe one of the things that I would like to share with everyone is that Telefonica has previously already implemented privacy by design, and I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more from you on ethics by design and the approach and multiple steps that you're taking on this front. Over to you, Joaquina.
Thank you, Moisha. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So for us, we believe companies have a responsibility on the impact on technology, the impact that technology has on people's life. And for that reason, in Telefonica, responsible AI is one of our most important commitments, and it comes from the top, from our management as well. If you can move slide, please. In our journey to become a data and AI driven company, where we started by first exploring all the potential that big data and AI had, and then started adopting and accelerating the adoption of this technology to what we are now, that we consider ourselves a complete data and AI-driven company. We privacy and ethics has been really key, and it has enabled to build trust with our customers. If we move on, please. Responsible use of AI is really in our DNA, and the processes that we have in place that I will explain later help us avoid bias, lack of transparency and explainability, lack of human control, and also impact on protected groups, and of course lack of control of the technology that we buy from others as well in this area. So how at Telefonica, if you can move the slide, please, we really incorporate ethical and sustainability criteria from the design and all through the whole life cycle of our products and services. And how are we doing it? So what has been our journey into responsible AI? If you can move slide, please. So first of all, back in 2014, we published a digital manifesto in which we wanted to open debate between companies and society about the digitalization that is happening, and not losing that this digitalization needs to be human-centric. We have updated this digital manifesto a couple of times, but this is really where we started. Then we published in 2019 our AI responsible principles, being one of the first companies around the world in doing so. After that, we started defining a methodology and a governance model to see how to implement this in our processes. And almost in parallel, we created a training program where we started to create awareness among all employees, but specifically we started to create this awareness and to explain the governance model and how to implement this among our product owners, the people who are developing AI technology and working with data on a daily basis, and also for our responsible AI champions, which is a role that we created early in the process because it is a key role that can help raise this awareness among these teams. They are close to the teams that develop AI. And then, well, for the implementations of this governance, the right champions help us a lot, and we can consider that we have now implemented responsible use of AI in all our processes. If you can move the slide, please. The governance model that we have in place includes a process in which every product owner that develops artificial intelligence and work with data needs to fill in a self-assessment questionnaire whenever they start designing a product that includes AI, or even they buy a product from third parties. So in those cases, the product owners need to fill in this questionnaire. The responsible AI champion helps the product owner evaluate these results, assess risk, even find solutions, apply tools and apply solutions and corrective actions to overcome those risks that might be detected. And then it is also the responsible AI champion that can escalate this risk to higher levels. The right champion, as I mentioned before, is really the expert that can guide the product owner in assessing this, and then also can escalate ultimately to the responsible business office. This process, as I mentioned before, really happens from the design phase at the beginning of the designing of these products. But we have also in place measures to make sure that when there is a new version of the product, and that means that there is a change on the purpose of the product or changes in data or in the algorithm, the product owner needs to review again the questionnaire and update it accordingly. So we make sure that we have the complete overview of the whole life cycle. If you can move the slide, please. Our governance model really is based on or promotes a self-responsibility approach, really, of our product owners to comply with the principles by filling in the questionnaire. And then what we have in place is a system of 3 levels of escalation, in which we have at the beginning the right champion, and our right champions are part of the different teams where we develop AI. So they are close to the teams and they really can guide them along the process. Our second level of escalation is a group of experts that is composed of the right champion and also members of the Chief Data Office, the Data Privacy Office, and Corporate Social Responsibility. It is a small group, but they can also bring experts from other fields in case, for instance, security might be involved, legal areas, etc. And then as a final step where high risk perhaps is detected, we have our responsible business office that deals with this type of high risk for the whole company. and that can also assess impact on reputation of the company. And then if you can move the slide, we have published several documents covering more detail about the role of the responsible AI champions, our governance, and our principles that you can go deeper about. And hopefully in the panel discussion, I can also go deeper in talking a bit more about some of the topics that I have already covered. So thank you, Moshe. Back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joaquina. And yes, a panel discussion. So we have heard quite a lot about three different journeys, different but very similar journeys from Telstra, Orange, and finally from Telefonica. And in all of the three presentations, we heard components around the governance model. However, one thing that I think it's always at the forefront of a question is around the technical tools and what kind of technical tools organizations are using and in what way these technical tools can be applied to multiple different principles, etc. And I think at the forefront of these technical tools is a self-assessment questionnaire. So all three organizations or all three speakers have already touched base on the self-assessment questionnaire. However, maybe just to follow up on this, Roxanne, if we first start with you, from Orange perspective, and when implementing a questionnaire that supports these activities, specifically of ethics managers across the group, would you be able to share a little bit more about it in how do you incorporate it and how do you support ethics managers across all of your operations in implementing, operationalizing this self-assessment questionnaire?
Yes, we implement, as I said, a questionnaire which is based on has different level, and it depends on the moment in the life cycle of the product or service, and the who asks the question. Is it the marketer? Is it the developer? Is it the user? It's because we have to tackle that differently in each phase of the product or the project. So what we have done is, as I said, we have some reference in every country, which are normally expert on AI. And we managed to take every use case and work with them to how to use this questionnaire with this product, because these even if they are experts on AI. It's not simple to ask themselves or the manager or the product owner the right question and the right time, and we help them to and train them how to use it. We have already in some of our business units tools named Eval Risk, which is used to evaluate all the risk on the product, on service, risk on GDPR, risk on compliance, a lot of risk around the project. So we also introduced this questionnaire in these tools. So this tool is mandatory to begin every project in Orange. So they use it also for the AI-based project, and we help them to understand how to use it and how to mitigate the risk, etc.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Roxanne. And you actually mentioned two other things that are so crucial. So as you might imagine, I think when kind of like implementing this responsible AI into your business as usual, time is of crucial importance. And for example, the way Ronch is kind of like looking at addressing this component is also that it's very specifically mentioning at what part of the life journey of the product specific questions need to be asked and who are the ones responsible to respond to these questions. And that helps streamline the questionnaire and kind of like taking out the questionnaire requirements quite significantly. And maybe Joaquina, now to you, and I will actually give the question, because you spoke about self-assessment questionnaire quite a lot in the presentation, or you briefly mentioned it, and also who is responsible for it. So actually, I'll give you Olga's question, where she's asking whether AI ethical process and questionnaires are separate processes altogether, or is it incorporated perhaps in other processes like data privacy, AI, security assessment? Okay, and I do know that Telefonica has a very great approach to it. Over to you.
Yeah, so definitely. We have a specifically self-assessment questionnaire for AI, for responsible AI, but is linked as well with our privacy assessment and security assessments. We make sure that there is a question in all of them that relates to the others, because exactly in our principles, in our responsible AI principles, privacy is key. So what we make sure is that the privacy assessment has been conducted and security assessment has been conducted. And likewise in the other questionnaires, we make sure that an evaluation of the responsible use of AI has been done. Similar to Orange, we have also, and we are embedding the questionnaire into the official processes, product development processes. So in that way, every time that a product owner starts working in designing a product, this will be a step that they need to go through, same as the privacy assessment and the security assessment and other stuff, no, like usability, etc. Our questionnaire has 14 questions that cover the 5 principles, and our approach is slightly different to the Orange one because we have the same questionnaire for everyone, but obviously the role of the responsible AI champion helps in completing it, and then this needs to be updated every time that the product changes, as I mentioned. We have done several updates of the questionnaire, so for us it's really important, and we are still adapting it to new impacts that can happen to make it more usable. So at the moment, for instance, we are making an update, and I'd like also to highlight the work that we are doing with you at the GSMA as well, in working together in a kind of best practice self-assessment questionnaire, no, that I think can be very helpful. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great. Yeah, you're mentioning self-assessment questionnaire. We continue working on this, and we are going to be updating on this topic as we progress. But maybe Lisa, one question to you. So all 3 of you have also mentioned in your presentations third parties. And it would be great to hear from you, what is this perspective when you're using this tool? Is it just for yourself, or is it also for the third parties that you're working with?
It's absolutely for our third parties as well. So the broader processes bring that in. Our questionnaire does specifically ask some questions around the use of third-party systems, and has some specific questions around that. Equally, it kind of dovetails really nicely into our supply management framework as well. So there's some additional things that have to be considered with a third party. So obviously having the right arrangements with that third party, whether it be legal, contractual type things, but some things that become difficult perhaps when assessing these systems against our ethics and our ethical principles. So for example, explainability can be hard when you're essentially buying a black box capability, as an example, but also it can be need to be able to feel comfortable that the supplier is thinking about things like what data are they using to train their AI models, and how are they assessing bias, and even down to things like who owns the algorithm. So obviously an algorithm is IP, right? So you have to sort of consider the ownership around that. So there's some understanding their processes and procedures is just as important as ours. As I said earlier, we remain responsible for this capability, regardless of whether or not we built it or not. So it is definitely considered. And we have on our arcade, we do have the right representation of the experts that can assess this, both from a supplier perspective, from a security and risk perspective, etc. So it definitely does get a lot of focus.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I think this is part of the conversations that we are hearing more and more about it, and will also be great to follow this journey. But maybe I would love to continue this conversation with yourselves for another hour. I think it's such an interesting topic. So many things are happening. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left. So I'll actually bring two questions into one. And I think overall, we have learned few things around the journeys of Delta Telefonica and Orange. I would also love to invite everyone to have a look at the playbook, where we are actually mentioning quite a lot of different references to the work that Orange, Telstra and Telefonica are doing. So you'll find the references also over there. But one of the things that maybe we haven't discussed that much is culture. So you briefly mentioned, all three of you, training and multiple awareness raising campaigns. However, are there any other cultural barriers, and how are you addressing this? And I would actually love to invite you, if you can be brief about it, and add also any of the final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience today. And over to you, Joaquina. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, we have for sure found cultural barriers, because this might seem as a slowing down innovation processes or time to market for products, and product owners might perceive might have that perception. So some of the actions that we have put in place to overcome those are really the training program that I mentioned before. This is an online course that we have. It's targeted to the whole company, but specifically for the responsible AI champions and the product owners, in which we give them the explanation about the governance, how to implement it, the examples and best practices explained by our responsible AI champions of how we are doing it with real examples. Also, the second thing that we did is to create this role, the role of the responsible AI champions, because they are very close to the teams where we develop. I mean, some of them are also developing AI products, so it is key to be there. And also the fact that we embed this questionnaire into the product development processes. So really, we think that those are key topics, and obviously always aligning the principles with the company values, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joaquina. Roxanne, over to you.
For us, as I said, what is important is to adapt this questionnaire and the principle, this questionnaire and each principle, the question on each principle to the purpose, according to the purpose of the use cases, because each of these 6 principles that we are working on, it is not always adapted to the use case. So it's to adapt that. And as I said in my presentation, it is also important to study every culture, every of every country and adapt how we are implemented according to this culture, regulation, etc. So we have a research program on this to make some studies in Africa. Even if each country, African country, European country, I'm sure that this principle is not almost the same in Spain, in Poland, and in France. It's a little bit different, the adaptation. So it's very useful for the local managers and referents to have a very dedicated tools in order to be to easily implement it and be okay with that.
Yes, certainly. I think one of the things that we notice when starting these conversations were the questions on like whether we can have a global approach. And there's no global approach because cultures across the world are so different, and hence the ethical approach that needs to be taken has to be adopted to that too. So Roxanne, you have made some incredible points there. It's also incredible to see how you have your ethical managers within different operations and that they are supporting these activities. Lisa, last but for sure not least, it will be great to hear your final remarks.
On culture, I would say don't underestimate the importance of it. I spoke about our senior leadership, bodies that are in there as well, but the teams developing and operating the capability are equally as important. We do have specific learning that we've developed, which is company-wide. So we've got a responsible AI module available for the whole company. And we've worked really closely with learning and development, so universities and the like, to develop more formal training that's available to our people. I would say that one of our biggest assets, I think, in here is a few years ago we established our Data and Analytics Guild. It's called Helix. And that's formed a really strong community of professionals that come from a variety of roles. So they're not just engineers or data scientists, they come from kind of varying backgrounds and work in different parts of the organization. But that's given them easy access to all of the training and development, but also a mechanism to learn from each other, support each other, and connect on things like fun activities and stuff like that. So, which also then fosters innovation and a whole bunch of other things too. So that's I think really helped us. The last thing I would say, and you started this around, nice gender diverse panel, or not in this instance. I actually think a diverse workforce is essential, right? So it's essential in the cultural aspects of it, but it's also essential in, as we start to develop and run these systems, that we're not entrenching inequality that already exists today, right? So all of those things, and ultimately it's about the people.
Yes,
So,
certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Lisa, on this. And thank you to all three of you on this great conversation. I really hope that everybody that was listening to the webinar enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. And very importantly, I really hope that these conversations triggered some extra thoughts and ideas on how to implement responsible AI into business as usual. We touched base a little bit on how to incorporate into business as usual, how to make it part of it. I am, again, hopeful that we are going to have even more conversations on this to potentially bring in even human-centric designers so that it becomes part of our everyday thinking and not necessarily something that is like an extra activity. And finally, I would like to invite everyone to have a look at our digital toolkit, as also at the AI Ethics Playbook, where you will also be able to find dedicated section on AI ethics part. Questions, we try to address one of the questions. If there are other questions, I would really like to invite everyone to reach out to me, and I will try to respond back, or I will try to connect you with the speakers. And above all, I would like to wish you to stay safe and healthy in these times. Health is even more important than otherwise, or we are appreciating even more than otherwise. But yes, please do get in touch, and thank you again to everyone for joining us for this conversation. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.